Welcome back, everyone. This is Answers That Count. I am your host, Charles Musgrove, and thank you for joining us for another exciting show. Yes, it is November the 20th, 2020. So we are making it through this 2020 year, and we're going to talk a bit of economics today. But before we get started, I'd like for you to subscribe to the show and hit the notification button if you're watching this on YouTube. We're also on Roku TV and Amazon Fire, so check us out there. And we're on all your favorite podcasts, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio. So whatever your favorite platform is, we're there. So check us out, subscribe to us, hit the subscribe button. And if you're watching this, leave us some comments in the notes, and we'll get back to you on that. So be sure and subscribe and hit the alert button. And today we're going to talk economics again. Yes, we've made economics exciting here on Answers That Count. And we have returning guest, Professor Joe Calhoun from FSU. Thanks again, Joe, for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here. Always love talking with you, Charles.
All right, we do our best to make economics exciting. I think we do a great job of that too.
I'd like to think so. Hopefully your listeners do too.
That's right. So I'm going to prop your book. We've got Common Sense Economics, and we're talking the third edition, which Joe is a co-author on this book. So, Professor, give us a little history on this book and some exciting news about what's coming out on the next edition in the future.
Well, as the name suggests, we're in the third edition, so I got to give a lot of credit to my good friend and colleague Jim Gortney here at Florida State. He teamed up with Rick Stroop many years ago and printed the first edition. It was a lot smaller, didn't cover as much material, but it was a great way to get people thinking about economics. And over the years, they added Dwight Lee, who was one of my mentors at the University of Georgia, and then my other good friend, Tawny Ferrarini, and they tacked on the personal finance section at the end in the second edition. And then I was brought on for the third edition to beef up that personal finance and make a few other adjustments along the way. And, any book, when you're talking about politics and economics, doesn't necessarily get stale, but, there's a few things that always need a little refreshing. So I was just added to be that refresher and then develop some curriculum so we could get the book in front of high school and college students. And we tagged it the third edition. It was printed in 2016, so it needs another refresh. So we're looking in spring of 21 to roll up our sleeves and start doing some refresh. And then later in the year 21, we should have the fourth edition out.
Well, good. That will, with all this happened in 2020, that is both from the political standpoint as well as economics. Those two really intersected in 2020, so you should have a lot of good material to present in the book.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of new things happening. Obviously pre-COVID, we had a roaring economy. COVID struck that down, and how we respond to that and the interaction between the regular citizen and government has changed dramatically. And then, of course, how we recover from COVID. So that's the reason we wanted to wait until spring 21. We wanted to get at least partway through, or hopefully we can turn the corner from COVID, get a vaccine out and get people healed up and get the economy starting to return to normal. But there's still a lot of the story from the COVID pandemic that's going to be yet to be played out. And we want to capture that. So that's the reason we're delaying until 21 to really get started with the changes for the fourth edition.
Good. I look forward to that. Thinking about all that's happened in 2020, you could probably devote an entire book to politics and economics based on the case study of 2020.
Yeah, it's been fascinating just to see the response of government, both from a health policy point of view and from an economic policy, and how really for the first time in centuries, maybe, that those two have really come together.
Right.
In terms of the health of the United States has dramatically impact the economy,
Right.
and vice versa.
Yeah, it is. And this week we got the news that Pfizer has their COVID vaccine ready to go to the market, so they're seeking FDA emergency approval on that, and the approval rate or the efficacy of that drug is like almost 95%. So that's an incredible
Yeah, that was
percentage.
some really good news. And since then, two other companies come out with very similar results. So we've got a lot to be optimistic about. And now it's just being patient and figuring out who's going to get the vaccine first and how quickly we can get it out. But there's a lot of optimism out there right now.
A lot of optimism, and if we have time, we can come back and talk about the effect of regulations on both the economy, how relieving those regulations could have had an effect on the speed of which they got these drugs, a vaccine created in less than a year. So it's pretty phenomenal to see that result. I think it's unheard of to have a vaccine created that fast and ready for market. So the best is yet to come. I'm sure that'll be distribution of that will begin within weeks, and then to the masses probably within months. So I know they're going to target the those that are most vulnerable up front, and then it'll be available for the masses after that. So
Yeah.
it's really been a lot in 2020 on the intersection of politics and economics. And one of the items that we're going to talk about today is a subject matter that's been on the federal level, on the state level, and in some cities down to the city level. And we're talking the minimum wage. So, the minimum wage has been $8 or $9, depending on what state or locality that you're in. But in the state of Florida, this has really hit home in the November elections that we just had. But in the state of Florida, they passed Amendment 2, which was the increase in the minimum wage to eventually to $15 per hour. So that is, that's a pretty dramatic change in what the minimum wage is going to be in the state of Florida. And the people that oppose that have talked about the ripple effect and the unintended consequences of what that increase would be. And lo and behold, Joe, there is in this book that we're talking about, there's a section on the minimum wage. So let's I thought it was very interesting to read this and see how the overlay of the political discussion, those that were opposed to the passing of Amendment 2 and those that were for it, and how your book was written well before this ever became a ballot initiative in Florida, but how the I would say economics and those that wrote this book were very objective and non-biased when they wrote it, and the viewpoint that truly what true economists would have as the perspective of the effect of this wage increase, the minimum wage increase.
Yeah, and that's our point throughout the book because we're trying to be fair and objective. Some people would say balanced. What we're trying to do in the overall theme of the book is just give people some really good basic economics to think about. And we're not trying to dictate good or bad, better than, worse than. We're just trying to get people to understand at the fundamental level of economics, choices are all about trade-offs. And minimum wage is what we call a price control. That is, the market would come up with a price, and then the government says, well, I don't like that price, so I'm going to pass a law to control it. I'm either going to force it up or I'm going to force it down. In this case, the minimum wage, even though it has the minimum in the title, is really a price control that forces that wage higher than where it would normally want to go. And the most important thing I want everybody to recognize is this is a very simple trade-off. What you're going to do, the effects of this are going to be to help some people out.
Right.
Absolutely. Some people who get to keep their job are going to get a higher wage than they otherwise would. And that's certainly going to benefit people. And then there's also going to be a trade-off in the opposite direction, that some people are either going to lose the job entirely, their wage is going to fall to zero, or they're going to have their hours cut back. So even though per hour their wage goes up, their total paycheck might go down. And now it's just a question of which direction do you want the trade off? And the voters in Florida have basically said, well, we want the trade off in this direction. We're going to boost people who hold on to those jobs, and we're going to let some of the other people either have their hours cut or lose their job. And it's a simple trade-off of which do you want. And so there's no right or wrong here. It's just which trade-off are you willing to live with?
Right. And I guess the bad part of that is where people are told that A is going to happen when in fact history tells you that A doesn't happen, but B and C happen instead. So if people think that they're going to have the same number of people employed for the same number of hours and just increase the wages and it doesn't have an effect on anyone else or any other prices, is that's a false story.
Yeah, and this is why minimum wage is such an emotional issue. It's an issue that's been around for decades. I mean, we as the economics profession and we as the political profession have been debating the minimum wage for decades. I
Right.
mean, it's been around for a long time. This is not anything new. This goes back to the 1930s when minimum wage was first introduced in this country, and you're right in terms of this is just the latest iteration of this debate. It's been around for a long time. And now it's an emotional appeal as well. And part of the reason it's easy to sell and get people jumping on the bandwagon here is because it sounds so good, right?
Right. Right.
Hey, let's take these people who are earning $8 or $9 an hour and let's eventually raise their wage to 15. I mean, who doesn't want people to earn more money? I want everybody to earn more money. I want them to have higher paying jobs. The complicating factor is if you just stop there, then people think that this is an easy analysis. Oh, you raise the wage and people keep their jobs in the same number of hours and they earn more, and that's the end of the story. Well, you really have to pause and you have to think more carefully. And quite frankly, you have to think a little harder about what happens next. What are the secondary effects? What are the long term effects? What are going to be the ultimate consequences? The initial consequences are really easy. Minimum wage goes up, paycheck goes up. Well, there's a lot more to think about than just that.
Right. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting, you have in the book, you got some expectations that are likely to happen. So if you, for every percentage or dollar that you increase minimum wage, then you have fewer people employed or fewer hours being worked.
Yeah, that's just simply the law of demand. So in the labor market, where I, as the employee, go and offer my services, I'm in the supply curve. As the employer who wants somebody to work because I have a job that needs to get done, I'm in the demand curve. So now we apply the law of demand to the labor market. So I, as the employer, when that wage goes up, I'm going to hire fewer workers or I'm going to have them work less. Instead of working 40 hours a week, I'll cut them back to 35 or 30 or, whatever number I think is right. So it's a very basic postulate of economics. When something becomes more expensive, people do less of it.
Right.
When you're a consumer and the price of your favorite item goes up, you buy less of it. Well, now we just tweak that a little bit in the labor market because now I'm the employer. When the price of doing business goes up, I'm going to do less of it. And in this case, I'm going to hire fewer workers.
Yeah, and part of the emotional appeal is they would always compare the minimum wage to a living wage, and they would look at the that people that were paid the minimum wage before a change were below the poverty level, or they were earning a wage that was in the poverty level. So that just appealed to that emotional outcry that we should raise the minimum wage. When you provided some statistics in the book that those people earning minimum wage weren't necessarily the only breadwinner in the family.
No, so the typical way to look at incomes in the United States is at the household level. It's very difficult to get the data from the Census Bureau and from the IRS tax returns to get it down to the individual level. So just think about your typical family. You've probably done this a bunch of times because I know you have a son and I've got several daughters at home. So we file our taxes as a household.
Right.
We don't each individually. So we have household data. So that's the first piece that I want people to recognize. We're looking at household data here, not individual data. And when we look at that household data and we look at the people who are earning minimum wage, they are part of a household that is above the poverty line. And many of them are above the average income in this
Right.
country.
Right.
So you're helping people who strictly from a financial and income point of view don't really need all that help. I mean, do we really need to take a teenager who's in a middle or upper middle class family and give them a higher wage? Again, strictly from a financial point of view, we probably don't need to do that.
Right.
So the argument is, well, we're going to help all these people who are trying to raise a family on the minimum wage. Well, that is such a small proportion. 15% or less
Yeah.
of minimum wage workers are actually in a household with one other dependent and that are trying to make ends meet.
So
So
now
we're
we're going to
talking
make
about a
this.
very small number here. I mean, most of the workers that are at the minimum wage are teenagers and young people, early 20s, who are probably still in college or just recently graduated from college in that in-between job before they launch their career. And the data that we put out there is about half the minimum wage workers are between the ages of 16 and 24.
Right. So you got the young people, and we have changed the whole system now if we've enacted this increase in the minimum wage. So we've kind of upended the entire economic system to only target 15% of the people that we've made this emotional plea for. So only 15% are single that are supporting a household that are earning that minimum wage.
Right. Yeah. So we've made dramatic improvements, and some people would say, or a dramatic increase in this entire system to help 15% or less of the people that we're really trying to help.
Right. Yeah, and it's
And we have to ask ourselves, is that the proper trade-off? Have we kind of created a monster to solve a small problem when maybe we could have created a different kind of income system just to help those 15% and still let the teenagers earn $7-8 an hour to get their start with some experience and learn some life skills by having a part-time job.
exactly. So now what you've got is and I think you imply this in the book, and I've heard other economists say the same thing, that you may have fewer of those minimum wage people being employed. So the starter job that your teenager or your youngster is going to get, where the employer is willing to risk and train people, those jobs won't be available. So
That's right.
it's going to create a problem for the youth that are getting started in their career, for one. And also, it now makes that automation, you put different economics on that automation system, that kiosk or that automation that replaces an actual person. You make it more affordable, so it changes the ROI on that automation that the businesses can put in place.
Yeah, and this is the other really important thing, because the most important thing to remember from our price system is relative prices are what drive behavior. So classic example is, I'm thirsty, I go to the grocery store, I walk down the soda aisle and I see Coke and Pepsi. The price of Coke is a number, but what's more important is that price relative to a good substitute.
Right.
So if Coke is $1 and Pepsi's $2, well, Coke is relatively inexpensive, and I'm going to probably buy most of that.
Right.
So now we go into the labor market. By increasing the minimum wage, we have dramatically altered relative prices. And what's the relative price of labor? Well, it's what you can substitute.
Right.
So now the automation becomes relatively more attractive. It's going to become relatively inexpensive because we've raised the minimum wage so high. So now what do people do? Just like when you go to consumer and you go to the store, you're going to buy the relatively inexpensive item. Well, businesses are going to do the same thing. They're going to say, hey, I can have a kiosk automated, or I can have a person.
Right.
Now, what's relatively inexpensive? They're going to go that way. And we've already seen these kind of innovations and relative prices change in the fast food industry. I mean, just think back to when you were a kid. The simple thing of getting the drink. I mean, somebody poured that drink for you and handed it to you. Well, businesses realize a much more inexpensive way of doing it, much more efficient way, was just to give the customer an empty Coke can or an empty cup, and have them go over to the machine and put in the amount of ice that they want and fill up whatever drink they want. And now that's the standard way of doing things.
Right.
And why is it? Because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's less expensive for businesses to do that. So businesses are going to innovate. They're going to invent. They're going to automate when the relative price tells them it's time to do that.
Yeah, and I think you picked out some examples there, and you've seen kiosk in places like McDonald's. They've had kiosk in the airport for a long time, so the technology is there. So now what you've done is, like you said, the relative comparison of an employee and cost per hour to the cost of that technology or that machine. So I think we're going to see more of that, and I think the hospitality industry and restaurants is probably one of the targets you're going to see change pretty quickly, because that industry operated on very thin margins as it is now. So when you throw an element like increase in the cost of labor, it's really going to put a strain on how they make money. I mean, they're going to have to increase prices, and they're going to look at other alternative ways to operate their business. Whether they go to you go to the counter and order everything. It's going to be a combination of all the above. Kiosk, reduction in number of employees, the way they deliver their food, all of it's going to change.
Yeah, I mean, there's two changes that we know are going to happen as a result of this minimum wage increase. Number one, there's going to be less employment in those kind of jobs. And number two, we know that the increase in costs that the businesses are going to have to absorb are going to be passed along, at least in part, maybe in full, to the consumer. So, one thing that's going to happen over the next 5 years, I guarantee, is when you go to fast food restaurants and other places that are dominated by minimum wage jobs, you're going to see fewer people and you're going to see higher prices.
Right. Yeah. And
Now,
it's
again, we're as a society in Florida, we're making a trade off, and we're saying we as consumers are willing to see that, because the benefits to the people who actually keep their job are going to go up.
right.
And that's the trade off we've made, and that's what we're going to see. Two things guarantee are going to happen.
Yeah, I know that's going to happen. I had a friend of mine and client that owns the Jersey Mike's restaurants, the sandwich stores,
Hmm.
and they've got about 30 stores they own across the southeast, and they have in places that have already approved a minimum wage increase, they've already got it down to, if minimum wage increases this amount, we increase our prices this amount. So they already understand the correlation of what they have to increase their end consumer prices by, based on what the increase in the labor cost is. So that's a definite that will definitely happen. And one of the things that, I don't know if you covered it in the book, but when you have wage compression. So if you already have somebody on staff that's an experienced person that you're paying $15 an hour, then you can't go hire somebody, a new hire, for $15 an hour. You're going to have to move those people up that are already in place to making $15 an hour. So, there's an additional cost on top of just that minimum wage increasing. You've got a wage compression cost that you've got to deal with also.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is role play through an example right now. Let's suppose that and let's fast forward to 2026 when we get all the way up to $15 an hour. Let's suppose that you already have somebody who's worked for you and is a very good employee for 3 or 4 years, and they're at $16 an hour. And now the brand new person who hasn't had a job ever before, first day in the job, they're getting paid 15. Well, how are you going to handle that as the boss? I
Right.
mean, that's a pretty tough message to give to the hardworking, proven, experienced worker who's earning 16. You're probably going to want to give them a wage increase, or you run the risk of losing them if you say, hey, it's so expensive for me to hire new people. I can't afford to give you a raise. That's a tough message to give.
Yeah, it is. So that is just additional cost that the employer is going to have to bear, and they're not going to bear it for very long without they've got to pass that cost along to the consumer. So
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a lot of these businesses have these huge profit margins that can just get squeezed and they can still be profitable and stay in business. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of these businesses are working on pretty low profit rates, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6%. And this minimum wage increase is going to evaporate all of that. And those costs are going to have to be passed along in the form of higher prices to consumers.
yeah, I see the shape of the restaurant industry changing dramatically, so that you will see fewer and fewer full service restaurants, and you'll see more fast serve, quick serve type restaurants where you have fewer wait staff that's working at the restaurant, and more of that will be on you. You'll order from a kiosk, you'll serve yourself, but you'll have fewer full-service restaurants that we're used to seeing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have already seen this. I was in an airport last year before COVID hit, and it was a sit down full service restaurant, but the wait staff didn't come over. There was an iPad at the table, and you just tapped in your order. And then a few minutes later, when the food was done, you had a server bring it to you, and that's it. So they were able. We're already making these changes,
Right.
and these dramatic increases in the minimum wage are just going to speed up that rate of change.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that it's the industry is just ripe for adapting to those changes quickly because we've already seen technology be developed. Now, what's happened is back to the relative comparison of your cost alternatives. Now, that technology cost is certainly just gotten a lot cheaper without the price tag even coming down when you have the comparison to people labor. So it's
Yeah,
it's make it
and
very
the other
interesting.
thing is, consumers are already used to this
Yeah.
because, how much do we order on our apps now? I mean, how much do we use our apps? I mean, I just went to a fast food place earlier today and I ordered and paid on the app on my phone. So consumers are very comfortable with doing this, and they're not going to really be upset when they go to a full service sit down place and they have to order on an iPad. They're going to be like, yeah, I've been doing that all day long anyway. So it's
Right.
not like we're going to ask consumers to make a radical change in their daily behavior when they walk into a restaurant. This is stuff they're already used to.
Yep. And unfortunately, the people that the intended target of this legislation is to help those low wage earners. But what it's going to do is there's going to be fewer of those employed. So you just have to wonder, are they really going to benefit from this change? And not only that, not only will there be fewer of those people employed, but they use their dollar purchasing power for a lot of the items that you're going to see cost increases on. So those are the people that eat more of the fast food, and the cost of fast food is going to go up as the labor cost goes up. So, Joe, this has
Yeah,
been
there's gonna be massive ripple effects here, and like you said, I think the bottom line is we're actually going to wind up hurting the people that we're trying to help.
yeah, unintended consequences. Joe, this has been another great episode where we have intersected politics with economics and talked about a real issue that we're looking at here in Florida. And many other states and communities have already adopted these minimum wage increases. So thank you so much for being our guest today on Answers That Count.
Well, very happy to be here.
All right, Joe. This has been Answers That Count. I'm your host, Charles Musgrove. Thank you for joining us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, all of your favorite podcast channels, and also on YouTube, Roku TV, and Amazon Fire. Have a great day. Have a blessed week. Peace.